4 more weeks, you can't live on potatoes.
I can't?
So then we put money into
What?
Yeah. So we'll.
Not in life.
Yeah, that's what we'll sure out.
I think it's time to call the meeting to order. It's time to call the meeting to order.
I don't know where your remoters are, but they're not on this meeting, but.
Okay, so this is the Wednesday, October 9th, 2024 meeting of the planning board of the town of Lincolnville. This is not an actual planning board meeting, it's more of a round table as I understand it. So, with the discussion. So we'll what we normally do is introduce the planning board members, and then I'll have Mr. Kenny introduce the other folks. So,
Andy Shapiro, I'm in Doug Trap, retired.
Frank Carrier, code officer.
Dick Butler, Chair.
Earl Brown,
Sandy Delano.
Skipped over Nancy.
Nancy Reeser, I'm scribe, and I'm from Searsville.
No.
yeah.
So the purpose of this discussion is that it's a commercial site plan ordinance revisions. Matt Eddy and Addie Filson is not here, I assume.
She's in DC today.
Okay. We'll review the findings from the land use committee to address future reviews of both minor and major commercial site applications under section 18. The major changes are identified under section 7.1.2.a of section 18. So with that, Mr. Kinney, if you'd be kind enough.
I'll be kind enough. Just so you know, Terry Moulton from the Land Use Committee is watching, has politely declined to join us on the screen, so shame on you, Terry. Anyhow, if you all recall, last year, the town received an application for a commercial development at the corner of Route 52 and 173, which created some concern amongst residents, I think is a fair way to state that. They approached the select board about what, if anything, could be done. The select board put forth a moratorium ordinance on non-residential something major project development. I don't have that word verbiage in front of me, but most of you were there, or a number of you were there. The voters at a special town meeting in December adopted that unanimously. The select board then reached out and found a number of people to serve on the land use committee to tackle potential rewrite of certain sections of the land use ordinance. And the select board also sought professional assistance to advise the community as well as the land use committee with the efforts, since a number of us aren't experts in land use development. In turn, the folks hired, the select board hired the Mid-Coast Council of Governments and Matt Eddy's group. Matt's been working with the land use committee for 8-10 months now, give or take. The moratorium's been extended once, because it was for 6 months or 180 days, I guess. The select board will be likely considering that another extension again at a meeting later in October. On the 28th, they'll be holding another hearing to possibly extend it because the land use committee's work isn't done. And one of the things that the select board had asked the land use committee to do was to meet with the planning board to hear what they're doing, what they're thinking, what the thoughts are, because you folks will be ultimately left with anything that the voters adopt to change for an ordinance to oversee. So with that, I'm going to, in everybody's concurrence, first introduce Janice, because Janice came in late.
Janice K., Lincolnville Center. Sorry I'm late.
That's all right. Matt's going to walk you through along with some land use committee members, and I'm going to walk out the door and go home and have dinner. And Frank at the end of the meeting, if you would kindly scroll to the lower right-hand corner where it says end and click on that, that will be lovely, and the rest of it will be fine.
Can you explain to me how I'm supposed to do that?
And I just did. You have a number of people here that are very capable of assisting you. And if it broadcasts all night, I'll shut it off in the morning. You don't have anything else that I might contribute in a good way or a bad way? Nope, good. Thank you all, have a nice night.
Thank you, David.
Lock the door too, Fran. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
Andy, do you want to add anything
What about
before we
the
get
cat?
started?
Andy Young, Chair of the Committee Committee. A number of people stepped forward, Earl off the planning board, myself and Terry on the appeals board, Lois and Jeannie, thank you, we've been instrumental in some of the original, work for the town, going way back, and people that were also familiar with comprehensive plan, so, Rick McLaughlin, joined, and, I think we got a good rounded committee from business people, residents, all looking at what we could do to kind of carry out the wishes of the town with that vote, but also try not to curtail too much business. And I think some of the product we've come up with, we met monthly since either January or February. I think we skipped our August meeting. Everybody wanted to have a little extra vacation time. But I think we've done some great work, and I really appreciate what Matt has done, a lot of great suggestions, and I guess tonight, taking it out of our 6 or 7 people, 8 people, and taking it a little bit further, you guys should have received about a week and a half ago. I want you to know that Matt did double duty to get that out to you. He had a lot of other projects going on, and that came out of trying to get it to you guys about 10 days ago. I know his schedule was thinking a whole week later than that, and he was able to do that. I just want to say thank you to Matt. He was able to do that, so. I think we have a good beginning, and hopefully something that, will strengthen our ordinances and be a little bit clearer. I think there was a little bit of confusion in our ordinances before. I think we've also seen a lot of other areas. It goes a little bit beyond the scope, but I think much of our land use committee is interested in the land use committee going. Because there are a number of other items that have come up off to the side that really could be tweaked or added to our ordinances, so.
Great. Well, because this is really an introduction to you folks for the first time, and frankly, we haven't even had a chance to talk about the ordinance. What I'd like to do is just go through my memo and go through the ordinance and then just kind of open it up for questions. When we began with the committee, we looked at, a few different options, given the purpose of the moratorium which was to find a way to better address the idea of a 10,000 square foot franchise and whether or not the ordinance was good enough at doing that. And I think we had some initial discussions that actually the ordinance wasn't so bad and you might have gotten away with the review and doing what you wanted. So really, we focused on how to make that ordinance better. We made a conscious decision not to get into the discussion about whether or not you want to permit either scale of size of franchises, whether they're drive-throughs or small retail or large retail. We felt that was and I say you all tell me if I step out of line. We really felt that was both a conversation that should happen in the comprehensive plan process. We also found, legally very difficult to restrict a 10,000 square foot building or a type of franchise in an entire community. That legally, the chances of that standing up in court would not be very good. Particularly since you have some existing buildings of different kinds that are at that 10,000 square foot space, and we talked about the Napa building, the lumber yard, and a couple others. So we came back to, okay, what can we do in the site plan review ordinance that better controls the activity that you wanted to address? So in essence, this ordinance does not say you can't have a dollar store. It says that you can design that dollar store to fit Lincolnville's character, the characteristics of the neighborhood, and we developed design standards to do that. It also reflects, we went back to the comprehensive plan and reviewed that, which we know was in the process of being updated. We thought that was a better idea. The comprehensive plan originally called for the introduction of districts, which would have made this process a little bit easier because, if you have some districts that allow a dollar store type of activity and others that don't, that would pass legal muster. But because we have one single zone, it was a legal jeopardy that I didn't think we wanted to have you go down. So we focused on the site plan review ordinance. And I'll go through some of the changes and talk about that. You should be very happy that I have my glasses because I forgot them at the last meeting. And I kind of faked my way through it. And with Montville, but they were fine. They didn't have very many changes to make. So the first section, we had a general sense that there's kind of a confusion in the entry, and I'm looking at you, Frank, because you've got to deal with it all the time. There's kind of a confusion going through who makes decisions in the site plan review ordinance and when they're made. You had one section that's about whether site plan review is necessary, and then there's a series of conditions. Then you have another section that has waivers. Then you have another section that says very specifically the code officer will make a determination as to whether this is a minor or a major review, and then send it to the planning board to make a decision. What we tried to do was combine all those things into one section. So we eliminated 2.11, the determination of whether site plan review is necessary, and we rolled it and moved it into section 7, the procedure section, and in particular 7.12, pre-application and determination. And I'll say, we sent you a highlighted version, which is essentially the changes that remain. We have a red line version as well that shows you everything that's crossed out, everything that was added, but it's busy and it's kind of hard to look at.
You don't want to see it.
Yeah, so we thought this highlighted version was a little bit better for you to understand what we did. So in that 7.1.2 now, we combined the pre-application process. The board will determine whether site plan review is required if asked and establish what waivers might be considered. The pre-application would be optional for minor projects and required for major projects. To obtain a waiver from either the submission requirements of section 10 or the other requirements of now section 11.12, you'd have to go through a pre-application process. There's a lot of discussion on the board about trying not to make this burdensome for people to apply to and to try to streamline it, but at the same time protect yourself for more complicated projects and applications. So we've tried to thread that needle in this process. Under 7.13b, there was a question about who should be handling notices. This is a question mark for you right now. Right now, the applicant still does that, and there was a question whether or not the town should do that and what the planning board thought would be that. And that's a question for you guys to talk about. 7.13K, new section. This is introducing findings of fact. You have no guidance in your ordinance for findings of fact. Findings of fact are a standard practice for site plan review, and What we suggested was introducing findings of fact, tying those findings of fact to the actual ordinance. So in your findings, as you look through that and you become familiar with it, you'll see that we've tied it back to sections of the ordinance that are appropriate. And, you know, our intent is to provide you a checklist that makes that findings of fact an easy process for you. And also sets up the process for the planning board to review the application, and the steps that you would be going through. We haven't done that yet. Once we get this closer to a final version, we'll put that together for you. The waiver submission requirements, again, later on, we're introducing some more complex ordinance review standards. So the land use committee was very concerned about making sure that the process was simpler for those simpler proposals that didn't involve a great deal of change in the exterior building. That maybe was just a change of use, but minor changes on the outside that their impact as a use or their impact in terms of design was minimal. And that using the waiver process would allow somebody to go through the application process, but also really focus on the issues that are important to that property. And so what we allowed the ordinance to do was that the planning board would be able to waive simple minor projects or major projects that did not have any impact could be waived by the planning board. In particular, for minor, they would be able to waive some submission requirements, the more detailed submission requirements, maybe a complete site plan, if really there's no changes going on to the property. And the board has they have the ability to look at it, look at the proposed use. The person's going to come in and provide you a description, and then you can make a decision whether you want to waive those or not. And then so forth with both the submission requirements and then the standards. So there's a two-step process for waiving. And that really, I think that really sums up where the board was, is that they wanted to try to differentiate. The goal here was to try to differentiate between simple site plan reviews that should not need a lot of expense by an applicant, and the more complex views that you really want to see a full application and you really want to see them adhere to the standards that we put in the ordinance. I found and as we reviewed it and when we talked about it, the committee found a fair amount of confusion between the standards of 11, 12, and 13. That it was really hard to follow, and it was a little bit inconsistent, and it was duplicated in some places and not enough explanation in others. And we understood that really the issue is to manage the impact of that project on the neighborhood, on the neighbors, on Lincolnville. So we rolled 13 and 12 together. 11 is really your standard engineering standards. We kept that pretty much the same, but introduced some new sections in it. And then 13 disappeared, and you just have a series of performance building and performance standards in section 12. So in section 11, some of the places that we made some changes in the parking lot design, we added a landscape section for parking lots because there wasn't really one, and as we looked at the original proposal that you had from the dollar store, there was no proposals for any kind of landscaping to speak of, really. And so we use that as a little bit of a flag. A couple minor changes. We created a base for stormwater design, at least 100-year flood, and there's lots of discussions about how many times the 100-year flood happening now, and how many times a 500-year flood might be something to be designed, but a 100-year flood is a standard design principle for site plan review, and so we're using that as the best baseline for the design of the site, particularly where they have significant parking lot and drainage. We added a section to ensure that the stormwater had a treatment system that removed particles, particulates, and any oil, gases, things like that. There are systems that are designed to remove those things and keep them out of the stormwater or groundwater surface, so we introduced that language. We also added a reference to the DEP phosphorus controls, given that storm water in the area and around the lakes was an important issue that we heard raised both during the dollar store period, but also just your general environment and everything flowing into the lake. It seemed like a good thing to do both here and on the shore. And then 11.16 is that it's just a tie back to 12 to make sure that an applicant is beginning to think about neighborhood characteristics. Section 12, in your ordinance right now, bring it up to speed. This is where the bulk of the changes were made. It starts on page 31. We introduced a new introductory section, and then in 12.1 to really talk about why, so that if you were to get challenged, you have a strong purpose statement. If you were to be challenged, that maybe the decisions that you took to ensure that the design was carefully, had careful consideration for the neighbors and had careful consideration for how the project blended with the community, that's a purpose statement that you can go to court and live on that purpose statement. 12.2 is an entirely new section, and it's on page 32. And these were design guidelines. The original set of design guidelines that we introduced here were more detailed. They were drawn from the town of Freeport's design guidelines. I have used that as a base for the development of site plan review standards in a number of different places because Freeport's design guidelines have held up in court. They were initially challenged by McDonald's. That was the more famous design challenge that the state saw now 40 years ago, 35, 40 years ago. And it went, I'm forgetting how far it went into the court system, but it got upheld at every step because they had this purpose statement and the design standards were thoughtful. The ones that Freeport has are a little more detailed, maybe a little more cumbersome to read, a real question about whether people would look at that and understand them and be willing to put them in your ordinance. I think there was a political reality check on that. So we worked them down to a simpler version that looks at scale relationships of the building and its facade, the roof shapes, the rhythm of spaces to building on streets, bringing the building to the street and how the design is laid out, both physically on the building and its relationship to the parking lot and to the entrance. All the while thinking about your village centers where activity is most likely to happen, and then blending the site features, the walks, the walls, the fences into the building, and then also blending with the neighborhood. Then in 12.3, this is actually a section that shows as being new, but I think you'll recognize it. We then really brought in, we took that initial discussion about the physical design of the buildings, which is 12.2, we said, okay, the relationship of the building to the rest of the site. The setback, the building orientation are both stuff that you already have in your ordinance now. The parking lot placement, which we tweaked and worked a little bit on and added some ADA requirements. And then the whole issue of parking in the front. And we talked a lot about that. And the decision was to avoid creating a building that's surrounded by parking, that's your existing language, but also avoid parking in the front, which is not necessarily there and strongly said in your ordinance. And then we walked through the site characteristics and asked the planning board to really think through setbacks, site internal vehicular, the site characteristics, the topography, in thinking about that design, and only thinking about moving from parking in the front or parking all around the building if there's no option. But that becomes a waiver discussion. Here are the standards, and if somebody really can't achieve that, if you think about the dollar store application, all their parking was in front. Their stormwater was a stormwater treatment tank under the ground because that was the only thing that could fit into that topography. They didn't want to go back into the hill. So they gave you all that it was that they wanted to do. And you don't want to be in a position where you have to agree to that. Now, I think, and they were meeting the requirements of your ordinance by not creating parking all around the building. So they actually were meeting the standards of the ordinance with their design, and allowing the parking in the front and not landscaping was all something that essentially was permitted by your ordinance. We think that what we put here would at least require applicants to think that through, think through the buffering, think through the landscaping, and think through the connection of the building, the activity, ingress and egress, and the street and the neighbors. That's our thought process, trying to get you there. And then there was a great deal of concern about building materials, so we've more thoroughly defined those building materials. Some of that's in your ordinance, but not as clear as I think it is here. My initial draft didn't have metal, but several board members felt that metal was still a reasonable approach if it was decent design. And the idea is for them to think about design, think about the materials, relate the materials back to the layout of doors, windows, openings in the facade so that you don't have a blank wall. Really thinking through those planning concepts. And we think that this helps you do that better. A couple of these are already in there. The C and D are already in your piece. Exterior lighting, we added some changes. Really better controls on how to restrict the lighting and keep that lighting to the limits of the property line, not impacting the neighbors, not impacting the street. We think the language that we did that will do that. We introduced the concept of ambient quality, whatever the ambient quality out in the area is, that design should somehow reflect what the ambient light quality, that in design that can be measured. And if you're uncomfortable with that, you can ask a developer to do a light design to demonstrate how it's not going to go beyond the property lines. And this gives you the ability to do that. If you were writing a zoning ordinance for the town and you were looking at performance standards, you would actually have all these performance standards in a separate section in a land use ordinance. You would thoroughly define them, and then you would simply require, and then you would differentiate the requirements for those impacts dependent on the zone. For example, if you have a commercial zone along Route 1, you know, the idea of lighting along Route 1 spilling over to commercial properties on either side is acceptable. That's, you know, that's something that would be okay. And you would have a commercial zoning district that would actually say that you can spill over into adjacent properties. Business parks is kind of a similar, you could do something similarly to that. Because you only have site plan review, we're really just trying to define that here and help you work with the performance standards here. We introduced the types of design, not being confused with a traffic control device oriented, that that you do not want to allow, or lighting that's oriented upward, that you're not going to use searchlights, lights that blink and flash, light inside of an awning when the awning is translucent. That's kind of a common franchise design, and probably one of the more offensive elements in those designs. So we really tried to do away with that. Then in terms of vibrations and odors, those are new. There's some things that you didn't have, but the idea is that you're establishing limitations. You know, again, we got into, you know, you allow all uses anywhere in the community. If somebody has a machine shop, you know, it's fair that the machine shop shouldn't impact the quality of life of its neighbors. So the vibrations from that machine shop should be confined to the property lines. And all they got to do is show you a design that does that. It can be simple, good foundation, simple soundproofing, and showing to you how they're going to do that, and then you don't have an issue, and you won't have an issue with your neighbors. Same thing with odors. We had some fun talking about odometers. The machines that in Biddeford, I actually had one in our office that measured odor. It's kind of a silly little machine because the user has to be the one that's established to measure the odor when it's using the machine. And I can tell you, no one would want me to be smelling anything, particularly today. But it is a way to control odors and odors. You know, thinking of cabinet maker with a heavy polyurethane or a heavy paint booth. You know, all it says is you're going to have those paint booths or the polyurethane booths enclosed, an air treatment system, and the air coming out not impacting the neighbors around that. We introduced a vegetated, going on to buffer and landscaping. We introduced the vegetative buffer strip along the right-of-way, and it kind of ties back to the other Chapter 11 designs, and then really trying to use as much of the existing landscaping and native design as possible. You have a quirky ordinance that apparently was part of a model that was put together years ago, because every ordinance I've seen in Knox and Waldorf County has it in there, where it has buffers by feet and height, and we found that just to be confusing. I'm not sure what they were trying to achieve with that. So we reworked it and just said the depth and height shall be designed to reduce the visual noise impacts of the abutting properties. And that's a decision for the planning board to work with the applicant on. There's some key pieces in this. We strengthened in 12.12 the prohibition of drive-through facilities. That's clearly something that the community did not want. The view shed is unchanged, it's just reorganized, so that it's all one section as opposed to several sections. And then all the final sections were renumbered based on the elimination of section 13. That's what we did. I don't think I missed anything. Did I miss any of the flavor of the conversation?
Come on, we got it.
And there was a lot of conversation.
There was a lot of conversation. We provided you a record of each of the meetings, what was discussed. Oftentimes, they sent me to do further research, so you see memos coming back once we got to that point that described how I addressed it and what I did in the meetings. And then the red line version, why it's busy, is it has all of the comments. It has all my comments as to why I was doing something. And then when we had further conversation with the board, I entered those comments in on the side. So between the red line and the record, you've got a pretty good idea of the thought process that the board went through. You can stop there.
Yeah, I just want to add that, looking at the pre-application hearing for minor, we were looking at how to simplify it for minor projects, and not have minor projects get caught up in a lot of changes, wholesale changes. And then the idea of everybody would go to a pre-application hearing, minor or major. And I think then another meeting that kind of got hammered out, that had become cumbersome, so the word may, so a minor project could, request a pre-application hearing, looking at the ability for waivers, and trying to find out what it is. So that they actually, for a minor project, with that extra pre-application meeting, they may find that half the submissions they're going to be asked to make are not. We also recognize that whether it's a minor or major, somebody may be told in the pre-application hearing that a waiver can be granted, but that actually can't be granted until the full meeting of the planning board. So there's a possibility somebody could be told in the pre-application meeting that you guys believe it can be waived, and then you're gonna change your mind. And it just turns out you can't waive it. So we realize there's a little bit of a contradiction in there, but I think as long as everybody knows that, that the pre-application, you're basically looking at, okay, yeah, we probably don't need you to do this, this, and this. A minor project, somebody may be able to go ahead without having to hire, have a lot of work done on the site plan and other requirements that we can do there. So.
I have a question. Do you feel that you should have addressed the notification to abutters for minor projects?
What does it stand right now? Everybody's, even a minor project is notified, correct?
No, it's not. And that was the problem. I think we've been before your board, the appeals board on that same issue.
Well, so that came up, I'll take it around. The appeals board made a recommendation to the selectmen 6 months ago. It was a change to an existing site plan review. That had all been approved years ago,
Right.
and then an amendment was made to it. And the appeals board feels like there's a little bit of an area in there. I can see where the town would read it, that it's almost like a minor change to an existing, but it's gonna bring up hassles,
Yeah.
My personal feeling is that yes, we should have notification, it should be done by the town for anything on site plan. It probably should be, it should, just like it would head off hassles later on. To have a.
Well,
What was the board thinking? They feel.
well, this was an issue that was very minor. It was an issue where there were a previously approved project was making a change to the interior of a building that had no effect on anything else. And it was appealed, and we waived it, and we said, fine, no problem. It was basically, I think, it was changing an upper level in order to make it an apartment. Is that right, Sandy? I think that's what it was.
Yeah, yours was storage and the bottom was a garage.
Yeah.
And then basically.
Where the tricky issue became in that, and I listened to their attorney, it became clear, and that's why I kind of wondered if we were gonna have litigation on it. We had to reject it on timeliness.
You did.
But they considered that timeliness should never have been a factor because our ordinance doesn't say either way whether a minor change to the site plan should have notification. Everybody kind of takes it that the original site plan has notification, and once that's done, there's more changes here, but it doesn't really say either way.
Well, that's why I was wondering if
Yeah.
you thought about addressing that.
Yeah,
I think we were told that we kind of might have to wait on that until after this.
I see.
but I mean, that's a procedural piece.
At this point in time, the select board is not interested in that minor project, they're interested in getting this in place. And then they'll address the other.
Okay.
Yeah, they kind of gave us some stuff, I mean, we do keep bumping up against these different issues, and
Yeah.
I feel that's a huge one that is gonna come.
Yeah, where's that section that says that? That's not one that I
If you're waiving, if it's a minor one, the planning board has the option to just waive everything and sign it on and tell them to go ahead and do it. And that was the case in this particular one. So we didn't go beyond the pre-application, as I recall.
It wasn't required
Wasn't
for
required.
pre-application because it was.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it wasn't a they did it anyways, just to.
But the
Cover
significance
themselves.
of anything else impacting what's being done on this, because this is one hell of a hot item.
Yeah, so wait, I mean, that's an interesting question. You know, you can waive a whole bunch of submission items, but you still might want to make sure that the abutters know that you're,
Well, here's the problem with that.
okay.
Because, and Dave Kinney brought it up. I want to put a new electric hot water heater in my house. Do I have to notify the abutters? No, of course not.
In many towns that I've covered 4 or 5 different towns, in each one of the towns, the citizens would complain, especially in subdivision, shoreline zoning, that they felt that the abutters should be notified. Without, no doubt, we're talking about money. The cost to notify would be a warrant article, it would be quite a significant impact.
But with that, you're going beyond site plan review, you're going to everything. We were kind of keeping this to site plan
Sure.
review.
Well, no, well, right, back to site plan review, the latitude should be there for the planning board to have the ability to decide if this can be waived or not. And if that's gonna be flimsy, then yes, put in the ordinance that they can or they cannot waive it, period.
That was my point.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're talking about a warrant article, depending on which way you go. You're talking money.
But right now, you have the latitude for any changes to a major project.
Oh, sure.
It's not so much that you're deeming it a minor project, in our language of minor and major. Yeah, I don't know how you, I'm trying to remember what the wording in there is. Or maybe you're relating it back that it at one time was full commercial site plan review, and you're now considering it a minor project.
We're considering it a minor change.
Minor change, so it's a private
Yes.
project, a
Correct.
minor change.
Right.
But I know it's from the appeals board and listening to their attorney, that was their crux, that nowhere in there does it give the authority for you guys to not do notifications. They're right. But then on the hand, you guys are right in saying, it doesn't say we have to do notifications. So I was really, I'm kind of waiting to see if that attorney was, well, I guess it depends on the abutters, whether they want to keep pushing it. But there almost seemed like there was a seed there for them to litigate and argue on it.
Well, I
And we
agree
really
with that, I
should close
understand
that.
that.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
So we agree with you, I guess, that's what it came down to.
Okay.
The question that this group had for the board, and it's really for you, Frank, in your office, is do you want to continue the process of the applicant is responsible for the written notice and he provides the receipts and the information to the code enforcement officer and he signs off on
It goes both ways.
it? Yeah,
Because one of them, subdivision says to do it one way, commercial site plan says to do it the other way.
State law's always been the
make
town's.
it one way or the other. The
Yeah.
cost involved can be quite extensive.
Well, it's work, it's also work in town hall.
It should be the responsibility of the applicant, this is their project,
Okay,
to pay for notifying to the abutters. And so that, and that's part of the requirement to proceed with this. Otherwise, you know, did the code officer or did their assistant, did they cover everyone?
Mhm.
Okay, and so you get into the financial aspect of it, the amount of time it takes to address all these things is a tremendous impact.
yeah,
Because to do, how do you notify them, how do you figure out who your butters are? Okay, you have to take a compass, you have to take this tax assessor's plan, you have to, you know, you don't need that distraction when that should be the applicant's responsibility.
okay.
And
that's what we're talking about,
Frank, when we went through that.
Oh,
But under site plan review, that is the town responsibility, correct?
No, it's the applicant and
and
then the CEO.
It's the town responsibility.
so they should do it one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, Frank still has to say, yeah, they've done it right. I mean, you could still end up in this appeals court saying, no, Frank read that wrong, yeah, didn't do it right. But, I've seen it done both ways. And really
We
the question
do
is,
it both ways.
that's true.
What I did hear of, there was a residential one over on Pitcher Pond. And then the one up here, this is not a criticism of Frank, they were criticizing Frank because they claimed that they had been pestering him for more information and that he didn't come forward with that information.
Well, that's a case that's gone to court.
Yeah,
That's,
and
no,
But there were two different instances where something like that happened, and I don't know if there's a way to put in there that it's not the job of the code enforcement officer to keep people informed. I don't know, it came up twice, and I understand one of them went to court, and
So that's
how
still,
it worked out.
it's still in court.
Some of the same one, so
And
even
it's
that one.
been appealed to you guys.
There was a similar one up there.
So you're into,
There was a similar one more recently though, with that commercial site plan, again, the comment was made, they felt they should have been notified by the code enforcement officer, if somebody had asked a question.
that's
So-
no, your code officer cannot, should not make notifications of commercial site plan activities. That is the responsibility of the planning board to make that decision, yes or no, not the code officer.
Well, if you viewed Frank as a judge in a court, the judge in the court is not allowed to help you if you're pro se, representing yourself. He cannot help you with the process, period. And he's a judge,
Mhm.
plain and simple. So our rules should reflect something of that nature.
Okay. What I'm hearing, I think we leave it just the way it is. It's not the same as the residential though. I mean, I could look at that and try to combine them into something that's similar.
Residence is a whole different, that's all.
Subdivision, yeah.
But it's still money.
I have a question that was brought to mind because it's a financial issue. I perused this. I wouldn't say that I read it in detail because it was just too much and I didn't have the time. But in perusing this, am I right in assuming that any technical report or study that the board deems necessary is the financial responsibility of the applicant?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay,
Always.
all right, because that has come up in the past in some issues where applicants are saying, well, you're requiring me to go to consultants as a means for preventing this project from going through. And I just want to make sure that I read quickly that that is taken care of quite nicely.
It's very clear in this ordinance, and, you know, that part of it really didn't need to be played with very much. The decision to ask for someone to do additional analysis is because it's plain on the plan that you have in front of you that you've got questions and they haven't answered and they haven't provided the evidence that you have faith in. And so the idea is always it's the applicant's responsibility to prove that the impact is whatever the ordinance allows you to have. I think in that particular project with the location, there ultimately would have been, you probably would have I would have recommended a third-party engineer to look at the stormwater drainage system. Because that looked like a complicated system to me.
We had put very strong requirements on them, that they could not go any further, that they satisfied the stormwater.
Yeah.
Also, the design of the septic system, and that was gonna be quite an expensive article, and they were going to have to provide people who were scientific.
I shared with this committee a little bit, that I actually thought that your site review ordinance, with the exception of findings of fact, probably would have allowed you to argue for a better design.
But just the logistic of this, where it was located and the grade of the property there.
Right.
I mean,
It's gonna make it hard to work.
The term fragile water body was big flags all over the place.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, the location is definitely wrong.
But I think we've made some changes in the stormwater stuff to make it even stronger. And certainly, an underground tank covered by a parking lot that's not buffered is not something that we want to see in any community, frankly. That's just bad design.
I don't know where we went with trying to give teeth to follow-up. In that design they had in the parking lot, there was some, there would have to be maintenance of a system like that.
We did,
And we had discussions at one point, I don't know if we ever finished those discussions, about how they would report or requirements the board may put on different commercial site plan reviews where things need to be maintained, or follow-up to make sure that different things that have been called for actually being adhered to. It wasn't,
One of the
places in our body shop, and
one of the
they say their odors are being kept in, and it turns out
One of the
they're not.
stipulations on any commercial site plan, if an applicant is presenting it, and one of the citizens has a complaint, then the applicant's got the opportunity to say, this is what I'm going to do. It's my responsibility to follow up, to see if it's working. For example, one was a dog grooming place. The church said, we don't want them there because they're gonna be parking while I'm having my sermons. They turned to the applicant, and said, what are you gonna do? The applicant says, I'm gonna put staggered evergreens. Then back to the complaint, what are you gonna, you accept that? He says, I don't know. So then it falls on me to follow up to see if that's happening. Or if it's an issue of noise. So if I keep getting complaints, then they have a noise problem that has to be fixed, it's my responsibility. The code officer's got to follow up, so that's who handles those things.
And I think that's what we determined in our discussion, that we just put more on the farm.
Well, and then that was our
I
concern.
wanted to-
So the concern with that was, is there some way to manage that, that there's a list of, right now we only have 5 or 6 commercial items that might need review.
Right.
20 years from now, we have 30. You may still be around then, Frank, I don't know. What is the method, I guess more of a question for us, what was the method of keeping track of those items? And especially that storm drainage system, which was kind of neat, to probably have yearly maintenance or to make sure that's actually happening.
You can request a submission as to what the routine is, to who is gonna check it.
That stipulation we can put in the approval process, you can put that in, but you have to have it maintained to some degree.
The code officer is gonna have the best common sense to have a tracking list necessary. I mean, who else in the town office is responsible?
Right. But you don't have a lot of language about it in the ordinance per se.
Should we?
If any problem, don't fix it.
Well, I think, as I'm thinking about and I'm hearing this discussion, it may be that you want to have some clause in it that asks the applicant to demonstrate how they're gonna manage these systems in the future, much like you do a subdivision.
That's exactly what
Yeah.
we would be doing.
Yeah, but we don't have that in here, so maybe we should put something like that in there.
Wouldn't hurt.
No, it would not hurt. Questions were about code.
Makes it easier to describe the code officer's job.
Job description, exactly.
Code officer's job description is everything.
Why do you think I'm trying to keep this thing up?
Well, I heard that happened with the pay raise.
Negative.
Maybe close to three.
Yeah, I think in the post-approval process. I'll probably think about it in section 14, but I'll give some thought to that language. So when Frank is faced with that, he can go back to the approval and say, well, this is what you said you were gonna do. Show me the documents that you were doing that.
I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah, okay.
What do you have for tools to allow you to keep tabs on that?
What's that?
What do you have for tools to allow you to keep tabs on that sort of thing?
That's a sort of rotation on my desk of the things that I like. It isn't.
Sticky notes.
Is that,
I have many piles on my desk.
is that some software that we might want to invest in?
No, because if software is proposed to you and it's not a supported software from a large firm, do not take it.
I'm just wondering, does the town have a scheduling calendar that it uses? And is there the ability to,
But if you're
as soon
talking,
as somebody has a submission requirement that on the 15th of March, it has to be updated on their drainage plan, it goes in and goes to both.
it's up to the individual code officer how he wants to track his projects.
That was my real question, thank you.
I'll work on some language to get that in there, so at least you have that as a backstop to fall back on. Work on. Other comments, other questions? We're way over the 10-minute mark.
I know.
You didn't tell them 10 minutes.
I said 15.
I mean, there's a lot to take on today, but how do we take the next step forward?
That was my question. Really good.
I think what would make sense is for us to come back at another meeting that you've got some spare time and raise any other issues that you have as we work through the ordinance design, and then go from there.
Flush it out.
Yeah, and we're eventually supposed to have a public meeting before a public hearing for the change. But, you know, we really wanted to have both boards, Frank, satisfied with where we were with the draft as it is.
Are we satisfied with where we are so far?
Maybe.
It's good.
No, I think it's quite good.
Any help is appreciated.
Well, so the fun part is chasing the dollar store. When they moved from here, then they went to Montville. So Montville put a moratorium in, so I'm writing Montville's site plan review ordinance. And rumor on the streets is now they're going to Liberty, and Liberty's prepared to put a moratorium in place. I don't know if that's true, actually.
We set a good example, okay?
Yeah,
Well, I heard they look at the old Mexican restaurant.
that is exactly
They
it.
went from the pizza place on one end of the strip to the Mexican restaurant on the other.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the Route 3 strip is not a bad place for them, but even those communities want it to look a little better. You know, I think Montville has really changed its flavor and how they're looking at things now. And you know, they'd like to strengthen their site review ordinance as well. So you guys have helped me, because what I'm gonna end up doing is turning this into a model for all small communities, and Saginaw, Knox, and
You get a kickback on each of those communities.
that's what they said in Montville. No.
One other thing came up in our discussion, and I can't remember how much we flushed this out, but that was the power of a code enforcement officer to make some decisions around minor projects without it coming to the planning board in the first place.
Well, we talked
And-
about that.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
well, then either you guys talked about it first and it came to us, or we talked about it and it came to you guys, but the idea is the code enforcement officer talking to the chair of the planning board, being able to make some decisions so it doesn't take up meeting time.
Well, let me simplify that. The shoreline zoning is 250 feet from the water. The laws, the rules are all the same, whether it's 10 feet or 250 feet. And that there's many ordinances, floodplain, shoreline that intertwine, and sometimes it's complex. But they found every time that I'm bringing these applications to the board, some of them are so insignificant, they're saying, why is it there? There was one, when this was put in place about 5 years ago, the idea was to let the code officer handle all the shoreline zoning because of the complexities of it. And the board all agreed, except one individual said, well, if it's closer than 100 feet, we want to make the decision. And that's what happened. Because if it's 100 feet closer, you have to make sure it's got a legal septic system. If it's gonna be demolished, the board has to decide, do we have to make them move it back 100 feet, back 100 feet, or are there anchors that can stop it? So for those two reasons, one of the board members decided, but the board is saying, we don't even get involved with that. So it's the same decisions, whether it's 100 feet or 250 feet. So that's why the board is saying they've had 5 in a row that last 15 minutes.
10.
6.
But wait a minute, first off, Sandy and Earl and I met with the select board a couple of weeks ago and specifically asked them to approach the LUC to consider doing that, or making it possible, or having he be the deciding factor on all shoreline zoning, whether it's within the 100-foot or 250 foot, because he knows so much more about it than any of us do. It's a very complicated issue. So they said that they were going to, that they felt that your agenda was pretty full, and that maybe when everything else gets settled, they'll approach that to you. So I don't know if they've talked to you about it, but we certainly brought it to their attention and asked them to do something about it.
We keep getting reminded that our vision is supposed to be very narrow.
Yes.
And get this done.
That's,
But it doesn't mean that the other parts don't keep coming up. But, so I guess what I'm saying is, the land use committee has heard a lot of items, and I think most of us want to keep going, because we see a lot of changes that can benefit and just streamline the process for everybody.
well, see, that's a very important one for us, because if it's such a minor thing, one of them was a dormer was going to be put on a house within the 150 foot, within the 100-foot mark. Well, that should never have come before the planning board. That's something that Frank should just say, hey, sure, no problem.
Just build it right.
The
Design it right.
caveat, all you have to do is put a sentence, the caveat is, all you have to do if you change it is put a sentence in there that says, in the event that the planning board is not satisfied with the decisions being made by the code officer, they can revert back to be in control themselves. They don't have to go to a town meeting or anything. It's a judgment call in the hands of the planning board. They can change it any meeting they want.
Yeah, that particular meeting was 4.5 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
So, and it's a burden on we looked at it as a burden on the applicant.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to avoid. Why do we have to put them off for 2 weeks to do something, or maybe longer in some cases, when it's so simple that,
Well, the last one we did, the people drove up from Massachusetts just for the meeting.
yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, they were all that same night.
Not over there, there's the cost that they have to put 9 copies of some type of extravagant layout so that the board can understand it readily and easily.
Well, I think you know, Frank, I mean, there are many towns that leave it to the CDO to make a lot of
I
short
made that,
decisions.
I had that in Stockland Springs, I had it in Searsport, I had it in Northport.
The outlier for me, the first time I saw it where it wasn't done that was Kennebunk, which insisted that every shoreline piece went through the planning board.
That's a lack of confidence in
And they required full findings of fact and a full reading of the findings of fact during the course of the meeting.
Wow.
That somebody had given them a legal interpretation that you had to read all the findings of fact as opposed to submitting and making a motion on a findings of fact that was part of the record. That's crazy. But they would move off of it.
We've done some of that.
There's no reason for that, and I do believe the
Yeah.
CEO can do that.
So are there any other questions, any other comments that, I think otherwise, we're happy and we can adjourn the meeting?
Very good job, Matt.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Thank you
Roger,
so much.
please.
This was, we need a motion?
Well, we need to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
It's not on the agenda. But we can do it since we've got time. We can let these folks go. There were two of them.
Oh, yeah, good.
Who did I put those? Yeah.
Here's my phone.
Yeah, there is. One was the 18th.
Nice to see you again. Oh, I'm 82,
I
I'm
looked
old.
at them, has everybody looked at them? The meetings from the 18th?
Oh, I looked at you, is he still here?
Good night, all.
Good night, thanks a lot.
Take care.
No,
So,
I get that quite a bit.
let's talk about the
Well, you
meeting,
can't quit. I mean,
They've stopped saying that.
18th of September.
They stopped
Can I
saying
get a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, good.
Second.
Yeah.
Any discussion on that? There's a motion
I
before the
know
board,
that people,
for approval of the minutes of the September
some
18th
people
meeting.
will not.
September
This is
18th.
what they
Yeah.
carry, this. I have to read it.
There's discussion? Any discussion? If not, we'd like to.
I don't see why you should, I mean, if you
You're all in
forget stuff,
favor?
but you don't forget stuff.
Aye.
Aye.
Strong, good.
It's unanimous.
And the 25th?
And then we have another motion for the meeting of the 25th.
You're a saint. You're
I made the last one, you make this one.
so highly.
What am I supposed to, what?
You're supposed to say, I approve the minutes for September 25th.
Oh,
Or
okay.
make a motion.
I'll make a motion that we
I
approve the
second
minutes
your
of the 25th as submitted.
Motion's been seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Oh, in favor.
Good, okay.
Do we have our next meeting scheduled yet?